She always fixes everything for us, my mother Linda announced proudly to the neighbors gathered around our kitchen table. Sheila will save the Vineyard, just like she saved Erica's boutique in that restaurant disaster. The words hit me like a slap across the face as I stood in the doorway, grocery bag still in my hands. They were talking about my money again, planning my financial future without bothering to include me in the conversation. My name is Sheila Patterson. I'm 35 years old, and I've been the family's unofficial ATM for 15 years. While my sister Erica gets praised for her entrepreneurial spirit, I'm the one who quietly writes the checks when her brilliant ideas inevitably collapse. Today, standing in my childhood home in Spokane, Washington, I watched my parents promise our neighbors that I would fund yet another one of Erica's failures. The vineyard she had been given as a graduation gift 3 years ago was hemorrhaging money, and somehow, once again, it was my responsibility to fix it. $250,000 should cover the debts and get us back on track, my father Martin continued, stirring his coffee like he was discussing the weather forecast. Sheila's always been so generous with family. She understands what's important. I set the groceries down harder than necessary, the sound echoing through the suddenly quiet kitchen. Every face turned toward me, wearing the same expectant expression I'd seen countless times before. They weren't asking if I would help. They were announcing that I already had. Growing up in the Patterson household meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy early. Erica, 3 years younger than me, had golden hair and an infectious laugh that charmed everyone she met. She was the daughter who got dance lessons, art classes, and encouragement to follow her dreams. I was the daughter who got practical advice about being responsible and realistic. When Erica wanted to start her first business at 22, our parents mortgaged their house to help her. When I wanted to pursue landscape architecture at 25, they suggested I stick with my accounting job because it was more stable. The pattern was established before I realized what was happening. Erica would chase her latest passion with enthusiasm and zero business sense. The venture would struggle because she'd spend more time planning grand opening parties than learning basic financial management. When creditors started calling, Erica would cry to our parents, who would immediately call me. "Family helps family," Martin would say, as if the help only went in one direction. "You know how hard this is for her," Linda would add, as if Erica's failures were tragedies rather than consequences. The Vineyard was supposed to be different. After her failed boutique, disastrous catering company, and short-lived yoga studio, Erica announced she was ready for something more serious. Our parents bought 20 acres of prime land near the Columbia River and gifted it to her for her 32nd birthday. "This time will be different," Linda assured me when I quietly questioned the wisdom of such an expensive gift. Erica's really committed to making this work. I watched my sister hire an expensive consultant, install elaborate irrigation systems, and plan a launch party that cost more than most people's annual salary. She called it investing in the brand. Within 18 months, the Vineyard was drowning in debt. Erica had ordered premium vines without researching what grew well in our climate. She'd hired too many seasonal workers and bought equipment she didn't know how to use. The expensive consultant turned out to be better at charging fees than growing grapes. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly saving every penny from my successful freelance accounting practice, building toward my own dreams while watching my family assume that money would always be available for their emergencies. They never asked about my goals because they never imagined I had any beyond being their safety net. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in September, when I arrived at the family house for what I thought was a casual coffee with my mother. Instead, I walked into a room full of neighbors, local business owners, and wine enthusiasts, all gathered to hear about the exciting Vineyard revival project. Linda beamed as she explained how her older daughter would be providing the funding to transform Erica's struggling vineyard into a premier destination winery. "Sheila's always been the responsible one," she told Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. "She understands that family investment is the best investment." I stood frozen in the doorway, listening to my mother describe plans I'd never heard before. A new tasting room, expanded production facilities, marketing campaigns, and staff increases, all funded by the $250,000 they'd decided I would donate. Martin stepped forward to add technical details about soil improvement and equipment upgrades, speaking with the authority of someone who'd never grown anything more complex than tomatoes in his backyard garden. The assembled crowd nodded appreciatively, already picturing themselves attending harvest festivals and wine tastings at the Patterson family vineyard. "When will construction begin?" asked Melissa Crawford, who owned the local flower shop. "We're hoping to coordinate our fall festival with your grand reopening." Linda glanced at me with the confident smile I'd seen her use when promising things she couldn't deliver. "Sheila and Erica are still working out the final details, but we expect to break ground before winter." The assumption in her voice made my chest tighten with anger I'd been suppressing for years. They hadn't just volunteered my money. They'd committed me to a timeline and public expectations without a single conversation. Erica bounced into the room at that moment, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. She launched into an animated description of her vision for the vineyard's future, complete with hand gestures and dramatic pauses. "My sister believes in this project as much as I do," she announced, throwing her arm around my shoulders before I could step away. "She knows how important it is to preserve family legacy." The weight of her arm felt like a chain anchoring me to obligations I'd never agreed to accept. As the neighbors filed out an hour later, chattering excitedly about wine tastings and harvest dinners, I remained silent. My parents bustled around clearing coffee cups and pastries, their movements animated by the successful performance they'd just delivered. They'd promised my money to fund Erica's recovery from her latest failure, and they'd done it publicly, making refusal seem selfish and cruel. But as I watched Erica scroll through her phone, probably planning her next expensive purchase, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in 15 years, the word no felt not just possible, but necessary. The week following the neighborhood announcement felt like being trapped underwater. Everywhere I went in Spokane, people congratulated me on supporting family business and asked when they could visit the renovated vineyard. Mr. Thompson at the bank mentioned how wonderful it was to see siblings working together. The cashier at the grocery store said her book club was already planning a wine tasting tour. Each conversation added weight to the commitment my parents had made on my behalf, creating a web of public expectation that seemed impossible to escape. Erica, emboldened by what she perceived as guaranteed funding, began spending with renewed enthusiasm. She hired a public relations firm to develop marketing materials for the vineyard's rebirth, ordered custom labels from a boutique designer in Portland, and scheduled meetings with distributors who specialized in premium wines. When I called to discuss the financial assumptions our parents had made, she laughed off my concerns with practiced ease. "Don't worry about the details," she said, as if my life savings were minor logistics to be handled later. "The important thing is that we're finally going to have something the whole family can be proud of." But I knew the truth about Erica's track record because I'd paid for her education and failure multiple times. The boutique had closed after she spent more on interior decoration than inventory, leaving her unable to pay suppliers who'd trusted her based on family reputation. The catering company had collapsed when she booked events without calculating food costs, resulting in $1,000 losses on every wedding and corporate function. The yoga studio had lasted 6 months before landlord issues and unpaid instructors forced her to abandon the lease early. Each time, our parents had presented her failures as learning experiences while expecting me to cover the financial damage. I drove out to the vineyard that Friday afternoon to see the current state of Erica's agricultural empire. What I found was 20 acres of dying vines, broken irrigation equipment rusting in the September sun, and a barn filled with expensive machinery that hadn't been maintained properly. The soil looked depleted and cracked, suggesting Erica had never learned about proper fertilization or water management. Weeds grew between the vine rows, and several sections showed clear signs of disease that could have been prevented with basic care. The expensive consultation she'd paid for had apparently covered impressive presentations, but not practical farming knowledge. Walking through the neglected vineyard, I calculated the real cost of restoration in my head. The $250,000 my parents had promised wouldn't begin to address the fundamental problems Erica had created. The soil would need extensive rehabilitation. The irrigation system required complete replacement, and most of the vines would have to be replanted with varieties actually suited to Washington's climate. Even with unlimited funding, turning this disaster into a profitable winery would take years of dedicated work from someone who understood agriculture, business management, and wine production. Erica possessed none of those skills and had shown no interest in developing them. Standing among the dying vines, I realized my parents' announcement hadn't been about family support or business investment. It had been about avoiding the social embarrassment of admitting their golden child had failed again. They'd promised my money to maintain Erica's image and their own, sacrificing my financial security to preserve family pride. The neighbors who'd gathered in our kitchen weren't potential investors or business partners. They were an audience for a performance designed to deflect attention from Erica's incompetence. My parents had used my reputation for responsibility to guarantee funding they had no right to promise, trapping me in a commitment built on their need to avoid facing reality about their younger daughter's limitations. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing financial documents I'd been quietly accumulating for 3 years. While my family assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck like most single women in their 30s, I'd actually been building substantial savings through my freelance accounting practice. Corporate clients paid premium rates for discreet financial consulting, and I'd developed expertise in helping family businesses resolve exactly the kind of problems that destroyed ventures like Erica's Vineyard. My specialty was turning around failing enterprises by identifying waste, improving systems, and implementing sustainable practices. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been helping other families solve problems while enabling my own family's dysfunction. The mountain cabin I'd been researching represented everything I wanted that my family had never encouraged me to pursue. Located 2 hours north of Spokane near Chewelah, the property included 40 acres of pristine forest, a renovated log home with solar power, and views of the Columbia River Valley that took my breath away every time I visited. The asking price was $280,000, more than my parents expected me to donate to Erica's Vineyard revival, but exactly what I needed to finally build the life I'd been dreaming about since college. My plan had been forming slowly for months as I watched Erica's Vineyard deteriorate, and my parents' denial deepen. The cabin represented independence from family obligations that had consumed my adult life. I could work remotely for my best clients while developing the landscape architecture skills I'd abandoned to be the family's financial safety net. The property included enough space for organic gardens, hiking trails, and maybe even a small workshop for furniture making, hobbies I'd never had time to explore because I was always managing someone else's crisis. But my family's public announcement had accelerated my timeline dramatically. What had been a distant dream was now an urgent necessity. I couldn't continue living in a city where everyone expected me to fund my sister's next failure, where my parents used my reputation to make commitments I'd never agreed to accept. The cabin purchase would send a clear message that my money belonged to me, that I had plans and priorities beyond serving as the family ATM. I made the call to my real estate agent that night, authorizing her to submit a full-price offer with expedited closing. The seller, an elderly couple relocating to Arizona, had been waiting for a cash buyer who could complete the transaction quickly. My agent assured me that with my pre-approval letter and earnest money deposit, we could close within 2 weeks. For the first time in months, I felt the excitement of pursuing something I wanted rather than something my family needed. The next morning brought a call from Martin demanding a meeting to finalize the Vineyard investment details. His tone carried the assumption that my participation was guaranteed, that we were simply arranging logistics rather than discussing whether I would contribute anything at all. Erica's already started the application process for the necessary permits, he informed me, as if permit fees were minor expenses rather than additional costs I'd never agreed to cover. We need to get the funding in place so construction can begin before winter weather makes outdoor work impossible. I agreed to meet with them the following Sunday, letting them believe we were gathering to sign papers and transfer money. But instead of preparing financial documents, I spent the weekend packing boxes and arranging for my most valuable possessions to be moved to a storage unit. If my family wanted to treat me like an ATM, they were about to discover that this particular machine was permanently out of service. Sunday afternoon arrived with the crisp clarity that only September in eastern Washington can deliver. I drove to my parents' house with a manila envelope containing documents that would end 15 years of financial servitude, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. The familiar neighborhood looked different somehow, as if I was seeing it through the eyes of someone who no longer belonged there. Children played in yards while parents tended gardens, normal families living normal lives without the toxic dynamics that had defined my relationship with the Patterson clan. Martin and Linda had arranged the dining room like a business meeting, with legal pads, calculators, and financial documents spread across the table. Erica sat at the head of the table wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people earned in a week. Her laptop opened to what appeared to be a presentation about Vineyard expansion plans. They'd prepared as if this was a board meeting, where my participation was simply a formality to be documented, rather than a decision to be made. "We've broken down the investment into phases," Linda began, sliding a typed document across the table toward me. "The first phase covers immediate debt relief and basic infrastructure repair. Phase 2 includes the new tasting room and visitor facilities. Phase 3 expands production capacity and establishes distribution partnerships." The numbers on the paper totaled far more than the original $250,000 they'd mentioned to the neighbors. Somehow, my parents had inflated their expectations while planning my financial contribution. Erica launched into her presentation with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never experienced genuine business failure. She clicked through slides showing architectural renderings of tasting rooms, marketing plans targeting wine tourists, and projected revenue streams that assumed immediate success in a notoriously difficult industry. "The consultant believes we can break even within 18 months, she announced confidently, apparently forgetting that her last consultant had led her directly into the current financial disaster. "This is really going to put the Patterson family on the map." Martin leaned forward with the serious expression he used when discussing money that wasn't his. "The timing is perfect, Sheila. Interest rates are favorable for expansion financing, and the state is offering tax incentives for agricultural development. Your initial investment will leverage additional funding that can turn this into something really substantial." He spoke as if my money was already committed, as if we were discussing implementation rather than negotiating participation. I listened to their presentation in silence, letting them build momentum with their assumptions and expectations. They painted pictures of family legacy, tourist attractions, and profitable partnerships, all funded by my savings and built on Erica's track record of spectacular failure. When they finished, the room fell quiet as they waited for my signature on documents that would transform their dreams into my financial nightmare. "That's quite a plan," I said finally, opening my manila envelope and placing my own documents on the table. "But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about my availability as an investor." The property deed for the cabin was printed on official county paper, with my name listed as buyer and a closing date from 3 days earlier. The purchase price was clearly visible, along with the certification that showed I'd paid cash for the entire transaction. Martin picked up the deed with confusion spreading across his face as he processed what he was reading. Linda leaned over his shoulder, her expression shifting from confident expectation to shocked disbelief as she realized the implications of the document. Erica's smile faded as she understood that the money they'd been counting on had already been spent on my priorities rather than hers. "You bought a cabin?" Linda's voice cracked with disbelief as she stared at the property deed. "When? How? We thought you were saving money for the family investment." The word family came out as an accusation, as if my decision to spend my own money on my own dreams was somehow a betrayal of sacred obligations I'd never agreed to accept. Martin snatched the document from her hands, studying it as if intensive examination might change the facts printed there. $280,000, he read aloud, his voice heavy with the realization that Erica's Vineyard rescue had just become impossible. "This is the money that was supposed to save the Vineyard. You can't just spend family money on personal luxuries." "It's not family money," I replied calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the anger radiating from 3 pairs of eyes across the table. "It's my money, earned through my business, saved through my sacrifices, and spent on my decision. Just like all the money I've given Erica over the years was my money, spent on her decisions." Erica's carefully constructed composure finally cracked as the reality of her situation hit her. But what about the vineyard? What about the permits I applied for? I already told the contractors to expect funding this week. Her voice rose with the panic of someone who'd been spending money she didn't have based on promises she'd never confirmed. You can't just abandon the family business when we need you most. I'm not abandoning anything, I said, gathering the deed and placing it back in my envelope. I'm choosing my own life instead of funding yours. The vineyard was never a family business. It was Erica's project that became my responsibility without my consent. The silence that followed was dense, with 15 years of unspoken resentment finally finding its voice. The confrontation that followed was everything I'd imagined and dreaded for years. Martin accused me of selfishness. Linda questioned my loyalty to family values, and Erica dissolved into tears over the unfairness of being held responsible for her own business decisions. But their anger couldn't touch me because I'd finally stopped caring about their approval. The cabin deed in my hands represented freedom from their cycle of crisis and expectation, and no amount of guilt or manipulation could make me surrender that independence. You've always been jealous of Erica, Linda declared, playing the card she'd used to dismiss my concerns for decades. This is your way of punishing her for being successful and creative while you're stuck in boring accounting work. The accusation might have stung once, but now it simply revealed how completely my mother misunderstood both of her daughters. Erica wasn't successful. She was subsidized. And my accounting work wasn't boring. It was profitable enough to buy 40 acres of freedom. I'm not punishing anyone, I said, standing to leave before their emotional manipulation could gain momentum. I'm simply refusing to fund another one of Erica's failures. The vineyard lost money because she made poor decisions, not because she lacked adequate investment. More money won't fix problems that stem from incompetence and lack of planning. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Erica's voice rising behind me, asking who would tell the neighbors about the changed plans and how she would explain the project's cancellation to people who were expecting vineyard tours and wine tastings. For the first time in 15 years, those problems belonged entirely to her. I pulled out of the driveway feeling lighter than I had since childhood, finally free from the weight of other people's expectations and my own misplaced sense of obligation. Martin, Linda, and Erica faced immediate social humiliation when word spread throughout Spokane that the promised vineyard revival had collapsed due to their presumptuous announcement of funding they'd never secured. Neighbors who had planned harvest festivals around the renovation timeline felt deceived by the family's overconfident promises, while local business owners who had expected tourist traffic from the winery expressed disappointment at being misled about the project's viability. Erica was forced to file for bankruptcy when creditors realized no family bailout was forthcoming, and the vineyard property was eventually seized and sold at auction for a fraction of what Martin and Linda had originally paid. Their reputation in the community never recovered from the embarrassing revelation that they had committed their older daughter's money without her knowledge or consent, making them appear manipulative and dishonest to people who had respected their family for decades. The beautiful mountain cabin became my sanctuary, a place where I could pursue landscape architecture projects, while consulting remotely for clients who valued my expertise without expecting me to sacrifice my own goals for their success. As I watched the sunrise paint the Columbia River Valley in shades of gold each morning, I understood that my years of financial servitude to my family's dysfunction had taught me the most valuable lesson of all. The word no isn't selfish when it protects your right to choose your own happiness, and sometimes the greatest act of family loyalty is refusing to enable the very behaviors that are destroying the people you love. You forgot again, didn't you? I said quietly into the phone, my voice barely masking the hurt that had built up over years of disappointment. My name is Anita Coleman. I'm 27 years old, and this was the 5th year in a row that my parents had completely forgotten my birthday. While I sat alone in my apartment in Charleston, South Carolina, with a store-bought cupcake and a single candle, my family was probably planning another elaborate celebration for my brother Sebastian's upcoming birthday next month. The pattern was so predictable it had become almost comical, if it weren't so painfully real. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," my mother Nancy said, though her voice lacked any real remorse. "We've been so busy with Sebastian's promotion at the marketing firm and helping Olivia get her catering business off the ground. You know how it is." I did know how it was. Sebastian, who was 25, had received a brand new BMW for his last birthday, complete with a surprise party at the country club where 30 of his friends celebrated with champagne and live music. Olivia, my 23-year-old sister, had gotten a $15,000 check to start her dream catering company, along with a weekend spa retreat that our parents called her pre-business stress relief package. Meanwhile, I had spent my birthday working a double shift at the dental office where I was a hygienist, coming home to find not even a text message waiting for me. "I understand," I replied, though understanding and accepting were two very different things. "I just thought maybe this year would be different." "We'll make it up to you, sweetheart. Maybe we can do something next weekend," Nancy promised. The same promise she had made every year for the past 5 years. Next weekend would come and go with radio silence, just like always. By then, Sebastian's birthday planning would consume all of her attention, and I would fade back into the background where I apparently belonged. After hanging up, I stared at the cupcake and realized something profound had shifted inside me. This wasn't just about forgotten birthdays anymore. This was about being invisible in my own family, about watching my siblings receive unconditional support while I struggled alone. But what my family didn't know was that their neglect had taught me something valuable: self-reliance. For the past 3 years, I had been quietly building something they couldn't see, saving every penny and developing a side business that was starting to flourish. They saw me as the forgotten daughter, but I was becoming something much more powerful. I was becoming independent, and soon they would realize just how much they had underestimated me. Growing up in the Coleman family meant learning early that love came with conditions, and I apparently didn't meet them. My father, William, owned a successful accounting firm in downtown Charleston, and my mother, Nancy, worked as a real estate agent for high-end properties. Between them, they earned enough to provide a comfortable lifestyle, but that comfort was never distributed equally among their 3 children. Sebastian had always been the golden child, tall, charismatic, and naturally gifted at everything he touched. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When he wanted to play tennis, they hired a private coach. When he expressed interest in business, they funded his MBA at a prestigious university. When he graduated and landed his first job, they bought him a luxury apartment and co-signed for his BMW. His birthday celebrations were legendary events that the whole extended family attended, complete with professional photography and catered meals. Olivia, as the baby of the family, received a different but equally generous treatment. Her artistic temperament was celebrated and nurtured. They paid for her culinary school, supported her through internships at expensive restaurants, and recently had given her seed money to start her own catering business. Her birthdays were intimate affairs, but no less special, with thoughtfully chosen gifts that often cost more than I made in a month. Then there was me, the middle child who somehow always managed to slip through the cracks. I had learned to make my own birthday cakes by the time I was 12. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school to pay for my own school supplies and clothes. When I graduated from dental hygiene school, I received a card with $20 inside and a note that said, "Congratulations on your achievement." When Sebastian graduated with his MBA, they threw him a party that cost more than my entire education. But their dismissal had taught me something my siblings would never learn: how to stand on my own. While Sebastian relied on family connections to advance his career, and Olivia called our parents every time her business faced a minor setback, I had quietly been building my own empire. 3 years ago, I had started a freelance bookkeeping service for small businesses, working evenings and weekends from my apartment. Word spread quickly about my attention to detail and reasonable rates, and soon I was managing finances for 12 different companies. The money I earned from bookkeeping went straight into savings and investments. I drove a modest used car that I had bought and paid for myself, lived in a small but comfortable apartment, and watched every penny. While my family assumed I was struggling financially because I never asked for money like my siblings did, I was actually building wealth at a pace that would have shocked them. They saw my independence as pride, but it was really survival. When you grow up knowing that help isn't coming, you learn to create your own opportunities. And slowly, quietly, I was creating something that would change everything. The breaking point came 6 months after my forgotten birthday. On a Tuesday morning that started like any other, until my phone rang with devastating news. I was preparing for my first client of the day when my father's voice cut through the line with characteristic bluntness. "Anita, we need to talk about your car," William said without any preamble or explanation. "What about my car?" I asked, walking to my living room window where I could see my reliable Honda Civic parked in its usual spot. I had bought that car 3 years ago with money I had saved from working overtime at the dental office, and it was one of my few possessions that I truly valued. "We've sold it," he stated matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather. "Olivia's catering business is struggling, and she needed an immediate cash infusion to keep the doors open. Your car was the most liquid asset we could access quickly." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You sold my car? The car that I bought and paid for? The car that's in my name?" "Don't be dramatic, Anita. We forged your signature on the title. Olivia's business is more important than your transportation needs right now. You can take the bus to work until you figure out something else." I stood frozen in my apartment, staring out at the empty parking space where my car should have been. They hadn't just sold my property without permission. They had committed fraud by forging my signature. But what stunned me more than the crime was the casual way my father delivered the news, as if my needs were so insignificant that they didn't warrant consideration. "How much did you get for it?" I asked quietly. $18,000. Every penny went to Olivia's business account. She's got a big catering contract coming up, and this will help her fulfill it properly. $18,000. The same amount they had spent on Sebastian's BMW down payment. The same amount they had given Olivia for her original business startup. My car, which represented years of saving and sacrifice, had been reduced to emergency funding for my sister's failing venture. "Anita, are you there?" William's voice sounded impatient, as if my silence was an inconvenience. "I'm here," I said, though I felt like I was floating somewhere above my body, watching this conversation happen to someone else. "Good. And don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Family helps family, and right now Olivia needs help more than you need a car." After he hung up, I sat in my empty apartment and felt something fundamental shift inside me. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This wasn't about favoritism anymore. This was about basic respect for my autonomy and property. But as I sat there, processing the shock and betrayal, I realized something else. They had just given me the motivation I needed to execute a plan I had been unconsciously developing for months. It was time to show my family exactly who they had been ignoring all these years. The next few weeks were a carefully orchestrated performance. I took the bus to work each day, letting my family see exactly how much inconvenience their decision had caused me. When Sebastian offered to give me rides occasionally, I accepted with gracious gratitude that masked my growing determination. When Olivia texted me updates about her catering contracts, thanking me for my sacrifice, I responded with supportive messages that revealed nothing about the storm building inside me. But while they saw a struggling sister adapting to difficult circumstances, I was actually executing the most important business plan of my life. During my lunch breaks, I met with real estate agents. In the evenings, I researched properties and reviewed financial documents. On weekends, I drove rental cars to property viewings, always careful to return them before my family might see me with a vehicle they hadn't provided. My bookkeeping business had grown beyond my wildest expectations. What had started as evening side work had evolved into a full-time consulting operation. I now managed the finances for 23 small businesses, and my reputation for accuracy and discretion had led to referrals that kept my calendar booked months in advance. The income from consulting, combined with my dental hygiene salary and aggressive saving habits, had created a financial cushion that my family couldn't have imagined. 3 weeks after they sold my car, I found the perfect property. A stunning lake house in the mountains of North Carolina, 2 hours from Charleston. The house sat on 5 acres of wooded land with 600 feet of private lake frontage. It had 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased breathtaking water views. The asking price was $450,000. I made an offer that same day. The negotiations took 2 weeks, during which I continued my daily routine of taking the bus and accepting rides from Sebastian. My family occasionally asked about my transportation situation, and I would sigh and mention that I was saving up for another used car. William would nod approvingly and remind me that helping Olivia had been the right choice for the family. Nancy would suggest that maybe I could find something reliable for under $10,000 if I looked hard enough. Their condescension fueled my excitement about what was coming. They saw me as someone who would struggle to afford a decent used car, while I was actually preparing to close on a property that cost more than Sebastian's BMW and Olivia's business investment combined. The closing took place on a Friday afternoon in April. I sat in the attorney's office, signing documents that transferred ownership of the lake house to me, paid in full with a combination of savings and a small mortgage that my consulting income could easily support. When the final papers were signed and the keys were placed in my hand, I felt a surge of accomplishment that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with proving to myself what I was capable of achieving. That weekend, I drove my newly purchased Toyota SUV to the lake house and spent 2 days furnishing it with carefully chosen pieces that reflected my personal style. I set up a home office overlooking the lake where I could work with my consulting clients. I stocked the kitchen with groceries and wine. I arranged the master bedroom with new linens and artwork that made the space feel like home. On Sunday evening, as I sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the lake in brilliant oranges and purples, I pulled out my phone and composed the most important social media post of my life. I selected a photo of the lake view from my deck, added a simple caption, and hit publish. Birthday gift to myself. Within minutes, the notifications started flooding in. Friends from high school, colleagues from work, former classmates from dental hygiene school. Everyone was congratulating me and expressing amazement at the beautiful property. But the responses I was most interested in hadn't arrived yet. I poured myself a glass of wine and waited for my family to see what their forgotten daughter had accomplished. My phone started ringing at 6:30 Monday morning. I was sitting on the lake house deck with my coffee, watching morning mist rise from the water, when William's contact photo appeared on my screen. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, Nancy called. Then Sebastian. Then Olivia. I silenced the phone and continued enjoying my peaceful morning. By noon, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The voicemails ranged from confused to demanding to almost frantic. William's first message was typically direct. "Anita, call me immediately. We need to discuss this house situation." Nancy's messages grew increasingly emotional with each attempt. "Sweetheart, please call us back. We're worried about you and need to understand what's happening." Sebastian's texts were a mixture of admiration and concern. "Holy shit, Anita, that house is incredible. How did you afford it? Are you okay financially? Call me back." Olivia's messages started supportive but quickly turned suspicious. "The house looks amazing. I'm so happy for you but also confused about how you could afford something like that when you've been taking the bus to work. Can we talk?" I waited until evening to respond, sending a group text that said simply, "Thank you for your concern. I'm doing very well and will be in touch soon." That message only intensified their calls. By Tuesday morning, the missed calls had reached 31, and Nancy had started calling my workplace. My supervisor at the dental office approached me during lunch with an amused expression. "Anita, your mother has called here 4 times today asking if you're having some kind of mental health crisis. She seems very concerned about a house purchase. I told her you seem perfectly fine to me, but she insisted I should encourage you to call home." I thanked my supervisor for the message and assured her there was no crisis, just family drama that would resolve itself soon. But I knew the pressure was building to dangerous levels. William had left a voicemail that morning with an ultimatum. "Anita, you have until Thursday to call us back and explain this situation, or we're driving up there to find you." Thursday arrived bright and clear. I had spent the week setting up my home office and meeting with 3 new consulting clients via video call. The lake house was perfect for conducting business, quiet, professional, and inspiring. I was reviewing financial reports for a local restaurant when I heard car doors slam in my driveway. Through the window, I watched my entire family emerge from William's Mercedes, my parents looking stern and worried, Sebastian appearing excited but confused, and Olivia glancing around with barely concealed envy. They approached the front door as a united front, probably having planned their strategy during the 2-hour drive. I opened the door before they could knock, greeting them with a calm smile that I knew would unsettle them more than any emotional outburst could. "Hello, everyone. I was wondering when you'd decide to visit." Nancy immediately stepped forward, her face flushed with anxiety and frustration. "Anita, what is going on? How did you buy this house? Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you involved in something illegal?" William pushed past her, scanning the interior of the house with the calculating eye of an accountant. "This property has to be worth at least $400,000. Your salary at the dental office couldn't support this kind of purchase. We need answers." I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Please, come in. I think it's time we had a long overdue conversation about money, family, and respect." I led them through the house slowly, letting them absorb the full scope of what I had accomplished. The open-concept living area with its vaulted ceilings and stone fireplace. The gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The master suite with its walk-in closet and spa-like bathroom. The home office overlooking the lake where my computer displayed spreadsheets from my consulting business. Sebastian whistled low as we passed through each room. "Anita, this place is incredible. But seriously, how did you swing this?" "Before we get to that," I said, settling into the leather armchair that faced the sofa where my family had arranged themselves, "I want to understand something. You've been calling and texting frantically for 4 days, desperate to reach me. When was the last time before this week that any of you initiated contact with me?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Olivia shifted on the sofa, looking around the room rather than meeting my eyes. Sebastian stared at his hands. Nancy opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. "I'll help you out," I continued calmly. "Sebastian, you last texted me 6 weeks ago to ask if I could cover your half of Dad's birthday gift because you were short on cash after buying new golf clubs. Olivia, you called me 3 weeks ago to thank me for the car money and to tell me about your catering contract. Mom, you last called me 8 weeks ago to ask if I could work extra hours at the dental office to help with family finances. Dad, our last conversation was when you called to tell me you'd sold my car." William leaned forward aggressively. "That's enough guilt-tripping, Anita. We're here because we're concerned about how you could afford this house on your salary. Something doesn't add up." "You're absolutely right, Dad. Something doesn't add up." I stood and walked to my home office, returning with a folder that I had prepared for this exact moment. For 3 years, I've been running a bookkeeping and financial consulting business from my apartment. I now manage the finances for 23 small businesses, and my monthly income from consulting alone is more than double my dental hygiene salary. I opened the folder and spread out bank statements, client contracts, and tax returns on the coffee table. I've saved aggressively, invested wisely, and built a business that you never bothered to ask about because you assumed I had nothing worth discussing. Nancy picked up one of the bank statements, her eyes widening as she scanned the numbers. "Anita, these balances? You've had this much money for how long?" "Long enough to help when Olivia needed business funding, if anyone had asked me instead of stealing my car," I replied. "Long enough to contribute to Sebastian's birthday celebrations, if anyone had invited me to participate in the planning. Long enough to be treated like a valued member of this family, if anyone had seen me as more than an afterthought." Olivia's voice was small and defensive. We didn't know you had money. You never said anything. I never said anything because no one ever asked me anything, I shot back. For 5 years, you've forgotten my birthday while throwing elaborate parties for Sebastian. You've given Olivia tens of thousands of dollars while I struggled with bus transportation. You've made financial decisions that affected my property without consulting me because you assumed I was too poor and powerless to matter. William's face had turned red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. If you had this much money, why didn't you offer to help when we needed it? I looked at him incredulously. When exactly was I supposed to offer? Between being forgotten and having my car stolen? You never asked for my help, Dad. You just took what you wanted and assumed I'd be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. The room fell silent, except for the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore outside. My family sat surrounded by the evidence of my success, finally understanding that they had systematically underestimated and dismissed the most financially stable person in the room. I want to show you something else, I said, pulling out my laptop and opening a document I had prepared weeks earlier. This is a detailed record of every family birthday celebration, family dinner invitation, and financial contribution request I've received over the past 5 years. I turned the screen toward them, revealing a spreadsheet with dates, events, and my participation level. Sebastian's birthdays showed elaborate celebrations with guest lists that never included me. Family dinners were documented with notes like, told about dinner day of, after plans were already made, or not informed until after dinner had already happened. Financial requests showed a clear pattern. Sebastian and Olivia receiving significant monetary gifts, while I was never asked to contribute or even informed about family financial decisions. You want to know why I didn't offer to help? I continued, my voice steady but firm. Because you never treated me like family. You treated me like a convenient afterthought who should be grateful for whatever attention you spared. Nancy's face had gone pale as she scrolled through the documentation. Anita, we didn't realize... You didn't realize because you didn't want to realize, I interrupted. It was easier to assume I had nothing to offer than to actually include me in family decisions. It was easier to forget my birthday than to put effort into celebrating me the way you celebrated Sebastian. William stood abruptly, his accountant's mind clearly processing the implications of what he was seeing. This documentation. You've been planning this confrontation for months. I've been protecting myself for years, I corrected. This house isn't revenge, Dad. This house is evidence. Evidence that I don't need your approval or financial support to succeed. Evidence that your assumptions about my capabilities were completely wrong. Evidence that treating me like an outsider in my own family was the biggest mistake you could have made. Sebastian finally spoke up, his voice subdued. Anita, I'm sorry. I never thought about how it looked from your perspective. You never thought about me at all. I replied simply. None of you did. Olivia suddenly became defensive, her voice rising with panic. You're being unfair. We had no way of knowing you were secretly wealthy. If you had told us about your business, things would have been different. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Would they have been different, Olivia? Or would you have just started asking me for money instead of asking Dad? Would Sebastian have invited me to his birthday parties? Or would he have just expected me to help pay for them? That's not fair, Sebastian protested, but his voice lacked conviction. What's not fair is selling someone's car without permission and expecting them to be grateful, I shot back. What's not fair is planning family gatherings and forgetting to invite one of your children. What's not fair is assuming someone has nothing to contribute to the family because they don't ask for handouts. William was studying the financial documents spread across the coffee table, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like respect. Your business income is impressive, Anita. You've built something substantial here. I built it alone, I emphasized. While you were funding Sebastian's lifestyle and Olivia's dreams, I was building my own future. While you were forgetting my birthdays, I was creating financial security. While you were treating me like a burden, I was becoming the most successful person in this room. The truth of that statement settled over them like a weight. Looking around at my family, I saw the exact moment when they realized what they had lost. Not just my financial contributions, which they were clearly calculating in their heads, but my respect, my trust, and my willingness to be treated as less than I was worth. Nancy began to cry softly. "We can fix this, Anita. We can do better." "No," I said quietly. "You can't. Because this isn't about doing better. This is about who you chose to be when you thought I had nothing to offer. And that choice revealed everything I needed to know about how you really see me." I stood and walked to the window overlooking the lake, my back to my family as they sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the full scope of what their favoritism had cost them. William, Nancy, Sebastian, and Olivia faced immediate social consequences when the story of the forgotten birthdays and stolen car spread through their extended family and social circles. Relatives who had wondered about my absence from family gatherings now understood the cruel dynamics at play, leading to uncomfortable questions at family reunions and social events about their parenting choices and treatment of their own daughter. Their reputation in Charleston's tight-knit community suffered when friends learned they had sold my car without permission to fund Olivia's failing business while treating me as invisible, revealing a level of favoritism and financial manipulation that shocked people who had known the family for years. Nancy's real estate business faced whispered criticism when clients learned about the family dynamics, as people questioned the judgment and character of someone who could systematically ignore one of her own children. Sebastian and Olivia lost credibility when their peers realized their privileged lifestyle had been subsidized, while their sister was excluded from the very family that supported them, making their achievements appear hollow and unearned compared to my independent success. As I watched the sunset paint the lake in brilliant colors that first evening alone in my new home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, and realized that my family's neglect had ultimately been the greatest gift they could have given me. It had forced me to become entirely self-reliant and shown me that the people who truly matter are those who choose to see and value you for who you are, not those who only notice you when you have something they want. "We've already decided who gets what. You get nothing," my Uncle Lawrence announced with that smug smile I'd grown to despise over the years. His words echoed through my grandmother's living room in Portland, Oregon, where we had all gathered for what should have been a solemn moment of reading Dorothy's will. Instead, it felt like watching vultures divide their prey. "My name is Annette. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent most of my life being treated like the family disappointment." While my cousins Patricia and Vincent sat there nodding in agreement with their father Lawrence, I felt the familiar sting of rejection wash over me. They had apparently spent the week since Grandma Dorothy's funeral dividing up her house, her savings account, and even her jewelry collection among themselves, as if I didn't exist. "The house goes to Patricia since she's married and needs the space," Lawrence continued, gesturing toward his daughter, who was already mentally redecorating. "Vincent gets the savings account to help with his business venture, and I'll handle the jewelry and other valuables." He looked at me with barely concealed disdain. "You can take some of her books or kitchen utensils if you want. That seems more your speed." I sat quietly in the corner chair where Grandma Dorothy used to read to me when I was little, watching this performance with growing determination. They had no idea what was coming. Benjamin Walsh, the family lawyer who had served our family for years, shuffled his papers uncomfortably. Even he seemed disturbed by their presumptuous behavior, but Lawrence had always been the type to steamroll over anyone who dared question his authority. Patricia leaned forward eagerly. "When can we start clearing out her things? I want to have the house ready for my family by next month." The casualness with which she discussed dismantling our grandmother's life made my stomach turn. This was the same woman who had visited Dorothy maybe twice in the past 3 years, and only when she needed money. Vincent chimed in. "I've already talked to the bank about transferring the accounts. They said it should be straightforward once we have the will." His confidence was remarkable considering he hadn't even bothered to attend Dorothy's 80th birthday party last year, claiming he was too busy with work. But I knew something they didn't know. As Benjamin prepared to read the official document, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small USB flash drive. The weight of it felt insignificant in my palm, but I knew it contained the power to shatter their carefully laid plans. Dorothy had been much smarter than any of them realized, and she had prepared for this exact moment with the precision of someone who had watched her family's true nature reveal itself over the years. Growing up in this family had taught me early that love was conditional, and I apparently never met the conditions. Lawrence had always been the golden child in Dorothy's household, or so everyone believed. He was the successful financial planner who drove expensive cars and lived in the prestigious West Hills neighborhood. Patricia followed in his footsteps, marrying a doctor and producing 2 children who were paraded around as the family's pride and joy. Vincent, though younger and less established, had inherited Lawrence's arrogance and sense of entitlement. Then there was me, the daughter of Dorothy's youngest child, who had died in a car accident when I was 12. I had come to live with Dorothy not out of choice, but out of necessity. My father had never been in the picture, and with my mother gone, Dorothy was my only family. While Lawrence and his children saw me as a burden, Dorothy had welcomed me with open arms and genuine warmth that I had never experienced before. "You're my little sunshine," Dorothy used to tell me during those early years when grief threatened to consume me. She would sit with me for hours, helping with homework, listening to my fears about fitting in at school, and assuring me that I belonged in her heart if nowhere else. While Lawrence's visits were brief and focused on what Dorothy could do for him, I spent every day after school in her kitchen, learning her recipes and listening to stories about her life. The irony wasn't lost on me that Lawrence, who had built his career advising people about financial planning and family wealth management, had completely misunderstood his own mother's intentions. He saw Dorothy as an aging woman who needed his guidance and protection, never recognizing that she was still sharp as a tack and perfectly capable of making her own decisions. Patricia would call occasionally to complain about her husband or ask for help with the grandchildren's expenses, while Vincent treated Dorothy like an ATM, showing up whenever his latest business venture needed funding. But I had been there through everything. When Dorothy was diagnosed with diabetes, I learned how to monitor her blood sugar and prepare diabetic-friendly meals. When she fell and broke her hip at 78, I took a leave of absence from my job at North Peak Engineering to care for her during recovery. While the others were busy with their own lives, I was the one who drove her to doctor appointments, organized her medications, and made sure she never felt alone or forgotten. Dorothy had noticed the difference in treatment, though she rarely spoke about it directly. Sometimes I would catch her watching Lawrence's interactions with a sad expression, or see her shake her head when Patricia would rush through a phone call without asking how Dorothy was feeling. She had a way of observing people's character that came from decades of experience, and she had been taking careful notes on all of us for years. The depth of her awareness would shock them all very soon. The moment that changed everything happened 6 months before Dorothy's death, though I didn't realize its significance at the time. I had arrived at her house for our usual Sunday dinner to find her sitting at her kitchen table with tears in her eyes. Lawrence had just left after what appeared to be a heated conversation, and Dorothy looked more hurt than I had ever seen her. "He thinks I'm losing my mind," she said quietly, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "Lawrence came here today with papers from some lawyer, trying to get me to sign over power of attorney to him. He said it was for my own protection, that I couldn't be trusted to handle my own affairs anymore." I sat down beside her, feeling anger build in my chest. "What did you tell him?" Dorothy straightened her shoulders with the dignity that had always defined her. "I told him that my mind is perfectly clear, and if he ever tried something like that again, he would regret it. But Annette, the way he looked at me, like I was already dead, and he was just waiting to collect his inheritance." She shook her head sadly. "I've worked my whole life to build something to leave to my family, but I'm starting to wonder if they see me as anything more than a bank account." That conversation had been a turning point for Dorothy, though she hadn't shared the full extent of her plans with me until much later. Over the following months, I noticed changes in her behavior. She became more secretive about her legal affairs, mentioning appointments with lawyers that she hadn't used before. She also started asking me more questions about my dreams and plans for the future, as if she was trying to understand what truly mattered to me. The revelation came 3 weeks before her death, when she called me over on a Thursday evening and led me to her bedroom. She pulled out a shoebox from under her bed and opened it to reveal a small video camera and several legal documents I had never seen before. "Annette, I need you to understand something very important," she began, her voice serious but calm. "I've been watching this family for years, and I've finally seen everyone's true character. Lawrence thinks I'm a foolish old woman who needs his protection, but I've been planning something that will teach all of them about assumptions and respect." She explained that she had created a fake will, the one that Benjamin Walsh would read at the official gathering. It was designed to sound plausible enough that Lawrence and his children would believe it reflected her actual intentions. But the real will, she told me, was locked in a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown, along with instructions for her actual attorney, Theodore Wilson. "The reading will be quite a show," Dorothy said with a mischievous gleam in her eyes that reminded me why I had always loved her so much. The day of the will reading arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that seemed to match the family's mood. Lawrence had insisted we meet at Dorothy's house rather than at Benjamin's office, claiming it would be more appropriate to handle family business in familiar surroundings. What he really wanted was to maintain control over the proceedings and ensure that everything went according to his predetermined plan. Patricia arrived first, already carrying boxes and bubble wrap. "I figured we could start packing some things right after the reading," she explained to Lawrence, completely ignoring me as I sat on Dorothy's favorite couch. "I've already measured the dining room set, and it will fit perfectly in our new breakfast nook." Vincent showed up 20 minutes late, looking distracted and checking his phone constantly. "Sorry, I was dealing with some investors," he said, though I suspected he had been out drinking the night before based on his appearance. "So, how long is this going to take? I have a conference call at 3. The casual disregard they showed for Dorothy's memory made my heart ache, but it also strengthened my resolve. They had no idea that their grandmother had been far more perceptive than they ever gave her credit for. While they saw an aging woman who needed their guidance, Dorothy had been carefully orchestrating a lesson about character and consequences that would reshape their understanding of family dynamics forever. Benjamin Walsh arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, carrying his briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who was about to deliver unwelcome news. He had worked with our family for over 15 years, handling various legal matters, and I could tell he was uncomfortable with Lawrence's presumptuous behavior. Benjamin was old school in his approach to legal proceedings, believing that wills should be read with dignity and respect rather than treated like a shopping list. "Before we begin," Lawrence announced, standing up like he was chairing a board meeting, "I want everyone to understand that we've already discussed the practical distribution of Mother's assets. Patricia will take the house since she has a family. Vincent will handle the financial accounts to help with his business expansion, and I'll manage the valuables and personal items. This should make the actual reading much more efficient." Benjamin looked at him with barely concealed disapproval. "Mr. Lawrence, the purpose of this gathering is to read your mother's will and learn her actual wishes. Any decisions about distribution need to be based on her legal instructions, not family assumptions." Of course," Lawrence waved dismissively. "But Mother and I discussed these arrangements many times. She understood that I would know how to handle everything appropriately." I had heard this lie so many times over the years that it barely affected me anymore. Lawrence had a remarkable ability to rewrite history in his favor, convincing himself that conversations that had never happened were actually detailed planning sessions. Dorothy had complained to me repeatedly about his tendency to make decisions on her behalf without consulting her actual preferences. Patricia was already taking pictures of various pieces of furniture with her phone, while Vincent had wandered into the kitchen to examine Dorothy's collection of vintage appliances. Their behavior was so callous that even Benjamin seemed taken aback by their lack of basic decorum. This was supposed to be a moment of honoring Dorothy's memory and learning about her final wishes. but they had turned it into a treasure hunt. As Benjamin opened his briefcase and pulled out the official-looking document that would serve as the fake will, I felt in my purse for the USB drive Dorothy had given me. The weight of it seemed to pulse with anticipation, like a heartbeat counting down to the moment when everything would change. Dorothy's plan was about to unfold exactly as she had designed it, and I was the only one in the room who understood what was coming. Benjamin cleared his throat and began reading the fake will in his formal legal voice. I, Dorothy Elizabeth Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The document was carefully crafted to sound authentic, while containing just enough ambiguity to make Lawrence and his children confident in their predetermined arrangements. As Benjamin read through the standard legal language about debts and funeral arrangements, I watched Lawrence's expression grow increasingly satisfied. Patricia was nodding along, mentally calculating the value of various bequests, while Vincent seemed bored by the formalities and eager to get to the financial details. None of them noticed that Benjamin kept glancing at me with a curious expression, as if he sensed there was more to this situation than met the eye. To my son Lawrence, Benjamin continued, I leave my personal jewelry collection and household furnishings, recognizing his responsibility as head of the family. Lawrence actually smiled at this, probably already planning how to liquidate Dorothy's diamond rings and gold bracelets. To my granddaughter Patricia, I leave my house and property, trusting that she will make good use of the space for her growing family. Patricia practically bounced in her chair with excitement. I knew she would understand, she whispered to Vincent. Grandma always said the house should stay in the family. This was completely untrue. Dorothy had never expressed any such sentiment to me, and I had spent far more time with her than Patricia had over the past decade. But Patricia had a gift for creating false memories that supported her desires, much like her father. To my grandson Vincent, Benjamin read, I leave my savings and investment accounts, hoping that he will use this foundation to build a successful future. Vincent finally looked up from his phone, showing the first real interest he had displayed since arriving. Dorothy's accounts contained nearly $50,000, which would be a significant boost to whatever business scheme he was currently pursuing. Then Benjamin reached the section that Lawrence had been waiting for. Regarding my granddaughter Annette, he read, and I could feel the family's attention shift toward me with barely concealed smugness. I recognize that she has been a devoted companion during my later years, and I hope she will find comfort in the knowledge that our time together was meaningful to me. The patronizing tone of this section was exactly what Lawrence would have expected from what he considered Dorothy's sentimental nature. Patricia actually rolled her eyes, while Vincent smirked. They saw this as confirmation that I would receive nothing of significant value, just empty words about emotional support and devotion. However, Benjamin continued, and something in his voice made me realize he was about to deviate from the script. Before we conclude this reading, there is one additional item to address. He looked directly at me. Annette, do you have something you would like to share with the family? This was my moment. I reached into my purse and pulled out the USB drive Dorothy had entrusted to me, holding it up so everyone could see it. The small device looked insignificant in my palm, but I knew it contained the power to destroy every assumption they had made about Dorothy's intentions and their own importance in her life. Dorothy asked me to give this to the lawyer during the will reading, I said quietly. She said it contained something important that the family needed to see before any decisions were made about her estate. Lawrence's confident expression faltered slightly. What is that? Mother never mentioned any video or recordings to me. Benjamin took the drive and moved toward Dorothy's laptop, which was still set up on her desk in the living room. Let's see what Dorothy wanted us to know. The laptop screen flickered to life, and suddenly Dorothy's face appeared in vivid detail. She was sitting in her bedroom, wearing the blue cardigan I had given her for her birthday, looking directly into the camera with an expression of determination I had rarely seen from her. The timestamp in the corner showed the recording was made just 2 weeks before her death, when she was supposedly too frail to handle her own affairs. Hello, my family, Dorothy began, her voice clear and strong. If you are watching this recording, it means that my will has been read, and you believe you understand my final wishes. I'm afraid you are mistaken. The room fell completely silent. Lawrence's face had gone pale, while Patricia and Vincent exchanged confused glances. Benjamin leaned forward, clearly as surprised as everyone else by this development. I have spent the past several months watching all of you reveal your true characters, Dorothy continued, and I must say that I am deeply disappointed in what I have observed. Lawrence, you have treated me like an incompetent child who needs your protection, while constantly pressuring me to sign over control of my assets to you. You see me as a burden to be managed rather than a person deserving of respect. Lawrence shot up from his chair. This is ridiculous. Mother was clearly confused in her final weeks. She was on medication that affected her judgment. Dorothy's voice from the recording seemed to respond directly to his objection. I know that some of you will claim this recording was made during a period of mental incompetence, but let me be very clear about my state of mind. Last week, I completed complex mathematical calculations with my financial advisor, revised my insurance policies, and had a lengthy discussion with my doctor about treatment options. My mind is perfectly sharp, and my decisions are based on years of careful observation. Patricia was staring at the screen in horror. Grandma, what are you saying? We've always tried to take care of you. Patricia, Dorothy's image continued, as if she could hear the protest. You have visited me exactly 12 times in the past 3 years, and most of those visits were requests for financial assistance. You complained to your father that spending time with me was inconvenient, and you only showed interest in my house when you decided you wanted a larger home for your family. Your concern for my welfare has always been secondary to your concern for what you could gain from our relationship. The accuracy of Dorothy's observations was devastating. I remembered several occasions when Patricia had indeed complained about having to visit, treating it like an obligation rather than an opportunity to spend time with someone who loved her. Vincent, Dorothy continued, turning her attention to her youngest grandson. You have asked me for money 17 times since you turned 18. But you have never once asked me how I am feeling, or whether I need anything from you. You missed my birthday party because you claimed to be busy with work, but Annette told me she saw you posting pictures from a golf tournament on social media that same weekend. Vincent's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. This is insane. She's trying to manipulate us from beyond the grave. The manipulation, Dorothy said, as if anticipating this exact response, has been coming from all of you. You assumed that because I am elderly, I was also foolish. You made decisions about my property and my money as if they already belonged to you, without ever asking what I actually wanted or needed. The recording paused for a moment as Dorothy seemed to collect her thoughts, and then she looked directly into the camera with an expression of absolute certainty. The will that was just read to you is completely false. I created it specifically to test your reactions and confirm what I already suspected about your motivations. Dorothy's words hit the room like a physical blow. Lawrence stumbled backward, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and growing rage. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, while Vincent grabbed the edge of Dorothy's coffee table as if he needed physical support. My real will, Dorothy continued from the screen, is currently locked in safe deposit box number 247 at First National Bank on Southwest Morrison Street. It has been there for 3 months, along with detailed instructions for my actual attorney, Theodore Wilson, who works with the firm of Wilson and Associates downtown. This can't be legal, Lawrence sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. Benjamin, surely this doesn't override the official will. This could be anyone on that video. It could be doctored or fake. Benjamin was staring at the screen with fascination and growing respect. Actually, Lawrence, if this recording can be authenticated and if there is indeed another will that was executed properly, then yes, it would supersede any previous documents. Dorothy smiled on the screen, an expression of quiet satisfaction that I remembered from the times when she had outmaneuvered Lawrence during family arguments. I know you are probably questioning the authenticity of this recording, so I have included several details that only I would know. Lawrence, you have a scar on your left shoulder from falling off your bicycle when you were 9 years old, trying to impress Sally Henderson from down the street. Patricia, you still sleep with the stuffed rabbit I gave you when you were 6, though you told your husband you threw it away years ago. Vincent, you borrowed $200 from me last Christmas and claimed it was for your mother's gift, but you actually spent it on lottery tickets. Each revelation was like a precision strike. I watched their faces change as they realized Dorothy had been far more observant and aware than they had ever imagined. She had been collecting these details for years, storing them away as proof of her mental acuity for exactly this moment. Annette, Dorothy said, turning her attention to me through the camera, has been my true companion and support for the past 17 years. While the rest of you were busy with your own lives, she spent every day making sure I was comfortable, healthy, and never lonely. She is the only one among you who loved me unconditionally, without any expectation of financial reward. The warmth in Dorothy's voice when she spoke about me was unmistakable, and I felt tears starting to gather in my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, she was still protecting and defending me. Therefore, Dorothy announced with the finality of a judge delivering a verdict, I am leaving my entire estate to Annette Morrison. This includes my house, all savings and investment accounts totaling approximately $2.8 million, my jewelry collection, and any other assets I own at the time of my death. The silence that followed was profound and absolute. Vincent's mouth hung open as if he had forgotten how to close it. Patricia made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Lawrence's face had turned an alarming shade of purple as the full implications of Dorothy's announcement sank in. Furthermore, Dorothy continued, clearly enjoying the thoroughness of her revelation, I want all of you to understand that this decision was not made in anger or spite, but after careful consideration of how each of you has treated me throughout my life. Annette earned this inheritance through 17 years of genuine love, care, and devotion. The rest of you assumed you would receive it simply because you exist. At that moment, as if Dorothy had orchestrated every detail with supernatural precision, the house phone rang. Benjamin glanced at the caller ID and his eyebrows rose in surprise. It's Wilson and Associates, he announced. The timing was so perfect, it almost seemed impossible. But I remembered Dorothy's obsession with punctuality and her love of dramatic timing. She had clearly calculated exactly how long the fake will reading and video playback would take, down to the minute. Benjamin answered the phone and put it on speaker. This is Theodore Wilson from Wilson and Associates. I was instructed by my client Dorothy Morrison to contact this number at exactly 2:30 p.m. today, 30 minutes after her scheduled will reading. Is the Morrison family present? We're all here, Benjamin replied, his voice carefully professional despite the chaos surrounding him. Excellent. I have Dorothy Morrison's actual last will and testament in my possession, and I need to schedule an appointment to execute her final wishes properly. Lawrence found his voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a croak. This is fraud. This whole thing is a setup. Sir, Theodore Wilson replied calmly, I have been working with Dorothy Morrison for the past 4 months to ensure that her final wishes were legally sound and properly documented. Every aspect of this process has been reviewed by multiple attorneys and notarized according to Oregon state law. If you would like to contest the will, that is certainly your right, but I assure you that everything was done correctly. Patricia finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. Annette, did you know about this? Did you help her plan this whole charade? I looked at each of them calmly, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in years. Dorothy had given me more than just an inheritance. She had given me validation and justice after a lifetime of being treated as lesser than. Dorothy told me about her plans 3 weeks before she died. She wanted me to understand what was happening and why she had made these decisions. You manipulative little witch, Lawrence spat, his composure finally cracking completely. You poisoned her mind against her own family. You turned our mother into a stranger. No, Uncle Lawrence," I replied quietly. "You did that all by yourselves." The Dorothy on the screen seemed to have one final message, as if she had anticipated even this exchange. "I hope that someday you will all understand that love and respect cannot be bought or inherited. They must be earned through actions and genuine care. Annette earned my love and trust every single day we spent together. I am proud to leave everything to her, and I know she will use this inheritance wisely and with the same kindness she has always shown me." The video ended with Dorothy smiling directly into the camera, her expression serene and satisfied. The laptop screen went dark, leaving us all sitting in the aftermath of her perfectly orchestrated revelation. The silence stretched on until Theodore Wilson's voice came through the phone speaker. "I can meet with all of you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to review the official will and begin the probate process. Miss Morrison, as the primary beneficiary, you'll need to bring identification and be prepared to sign several documents." "I'll be there," I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. Lawrence, Patricia, and Vincent sat in stunned silence as the weight of their situation finally sank in. They had lost everything they had assumed was rightfully theirs, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Dorothy's plan had worked flawlessly, and justice had finally been served. Lawrence, Patricia, and Vincent faced devastating consequences that extended far beyond their financial disappointment. Lawrence lost his position as a financial planner when several clients learned about the family situation and questioned his judgment and character, wondering how someone who couldn't understand his own mother's estate planning could be trusted with their investments. His reputation in Portland's financial community was permanently damaged when word spread about how he had pressured an elderly client, his own mother, to sign over power of attorney, and had presumptively divided her assets before her will was even read. Patricia and her husband were forced to abandon their plans for a larger home and faced ongoing tension in their marriage when he learned about her years of neglecting Dorothy while expecting an inheritance. Vincent's business ventures collapsed when potential investors discovered his entitled attitude toward family wealth and his pattern of asking elderly relatives for money, making them question his work ethic and financial responsibility. The three siblings became cautionary figures in their social circles, known as the family members who had been so cruel and presumptuous that their own mother had orchestrated an elaborate deception to teach them about character and consequences. As I established the Dorothy Morrison Memorial Foundation for Elder Care using my grandmother's generous inheritance, I reflected on the elegant justice of her final gift to me. Not just the financial security I had never expected, but the validation that genuine love and daily acts of kindness matter more than blood relations or social expectations, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own choices.